The drive to Blackwood National Preserve took 7 hours from the nearest town. My beat-up pickup truck coughed its last mile as I pulled into the ranger station gravel lot at exactly 3:45 p.m., 15 minutes ahead of schedule. The posting had promised competitive pay, housing, and isolation, exactly what someone with $60,000 in student loan debt needed. Station 17 looked like it hadn't been updated since the 70s. Weathered pine siding, a rusted metal roof, and a single tower with a blinking red light that pulsed like a slow heartbeat. No other vehicles in the lot, no sign of the previous ranger whose retirement had opened this position. The key was under a rock shaped like a turtle's shell, exactly as described in the orientation packet. Inside, everything was clean but dated. A logbook sat open on the counter with yesterday's entry written in neat block letters. All patrols completed, no anomalies, inventory complete, ready for handoff. I spent the first hour inventorying supplies according to the checklist. 12 flashlights, 3 per shift, 36D batteries, emergency rations for 14 days, first aid kit, two-way radios, channels 1-6, salt canisters, and a strange collection of iron keys labeled with numbers but no corresponding doors. The previous ranger had left a note on the refrigerator. Read the protocol manual before your first patrol. No exceptions. The manual wasn't in the station office. I found it in a locked drawer in the bedroom, bound in plain black leather with no title. The first page contained only a single sentence. Your survival depends on following these rules without question. The second page began the numbered list. I read through them twice, the practical part of my brain dismissing them as some kind of hazing ritual, while a deeper instinct told me to pay attention. 1. Complete a full perimeter check of Station 17 before sunset each day. Count the fence posts. There should be exactly 47. If you count 48, do not acknowledge the extra post. Simply continue your count as if you reached 47. 2. Between 8:30 p.m. and 9:15 p.m., lock all windows regardless of temperature. Do not look through any window during this time period, even if you hear knocking. 3. If you encounter a deer on the trail between markers 7 and 12, stop and wait until it moves away. Do not make eye contact. If the deer has 6 legs, document it in the logbook, but do not attempt to photograph it. 4. Radio checks must be performed at exactly 10 p.m. on Channel 3 only. Use the standard call sign, but never identify yourself by name. The response will confirm your position. 5. Never accept food or water from hikers you encounter after 5 p.m., even if they appear to be in distress. 6. The cabin at marker 22 is off limits. Do not approach within 50 yards of this structure under any circumstances. 7. If you hear footsteps circling the station at night, do not investigate. Count the steps. If the count exceeds 120, place salt at all doorways before sunrise. 8. The West Trail is closed between 11 p.m. and 2 a.m. If you see hikers on this trail during these hours, they are not hikers. 9. Always carry iron when patrolling after dark. The keys in the locked drawer will suffice. 10. If you find items arranged in circles on the forest floor, do not disturb them. Note the location and continue your patrol. 11. Never respond to voices calling your name from the forest, even if they sound familiar. 12. The bathroom mirror must be covered between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. Use the black cloth in the bottom drawer of the filing cabinet. 13. Inventory all supplies every Monday at 7 a.m. If anything is missing, do not replace it until the following Monday. 14. If you encounter another ranger, verify their identity by asking about the weather yesterday. If they cannot answer, do not acknowledge them as a ranger. I closed the manual and checked my watch. 5:47 p.m. The sun would set in approximately 1 hour and 13 minutes. Time for my first perimeter check. The fence surrounding Station 17 stood 8 feet high, constructed of metal posts and wire mesh that had weathered to a dull gray. I began at the north gate and moved clockwise, counting each post. 1, 2, 3. The routine was normal enough, something I'd done at other parks. The air smelled of pine and damp earth. Birds chirped their evening songs. 36, 37, 38. I reached the southeast corner where the forest pressed closest to the station. The trees here were older, thicker, their branches creating a canopy that blocked much of the remaining sunlight. 42, 43, 44. I stopped at post 45. Something felt wrong. I looked ahead. 46, 47, and then another post that hadn't been visible from a distance. 48. My first instinct was to double-check my count, to walk back and start again. But rule number 1 was specific. If you count 48, do not acknowledge the extra post. I continued walking, my boots crunching on the gravel path, pretending I hadn't seen the extra post. When I reached the north gate again, I recorded 47 posts in the logbook, my hand shaking slightly. Inside, I began securing windows as the sun dipped below the tree line. The station felt smaller now, the shadows deeper. At 8:30 p.m., I locked the last window and pulled the curtains, following the rules precisely. My radio sat on the counter, silent for now. At 10 p.m., I would make my first call. The minutes passed slowly. I organized supplies, checked the battery levels in all flashlights, and reviewed the trail maps. The preserve covered 80 square miles of wilderness, with only 3 marked trails and numerous unmarked paths that the manual advised against exploring. At 9:58 p.m., I picked up the radio and switched to Channel 3. My heart beat faster than it should have. This was just a routine radio check, something I'd done hundreds of times in other parks. At exactly 10:01 p.m., I pressed the transmit button. Station 17 requesting position check. Over. The response came immediately, the voice distorted but clear. Position confirmed, all clear, over. I released a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. The voice hadn't asked for my name or identification. It had simply confirmed my position, as the rules stated it would. The night passed quietly. At 2 a.m., I covered the bathroom mirror with the black cloth from the filing cabinet. My hands steady despite the strangeness of the task. I patrolled the station interior every 2 hours, checking door locks and window seals. No footsteps circled the building. No deer appeared on the trail cameras. By sunrise, I was exhausted but relieved. My first week followed a similar pattern. Perimeter checks, always 47 posts, though I occasionally saw the extra one from the corner of my eye. Window locks, radio checks, mirror covering. I began to settle into a routine, to almost convince myself that the rules were just elaborate security protocols. On Thursday evening, I was patrolling the East Trail when I encountered a hiker heading toward the station. It was 6:15 p.m., well past the 5 p.m. cutoff mentioned in Rule 5. The hiker looked normal enough. Middle-aged man, expensive hiking gear, a friendly smile. "Evening, Ranger," he called out. "Got any water? I seem to have run out." Rule 5 was clear. Never accept food or water from hikers after 5 p.m. But it didn't say anything about giving water to them. Still, something about the man's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Sorry," I replied, keeping my distance. "Station supplies are for emergency use only. There's a stream about half a mile back if you filter it." The man's smile widened. "Oh, I don't need to filter it. I have my own purification system." He held up a canteen. "I was hoping to trade for some of your station water. I have cash." Rule 5 didn't mention cash transactions, but the manual had been very specific about some things and vague about others. I remembered Rule 14. If you encounter another ranger, verify their identity by asking about the weather yesterday. This man wasn't claiming to be a ranger, but the verification process seemed useful. "Hot yesterday," I said casually. "Unusual for this time of year." The man's smile faltered for just a second. "Yes, quite unusual. Almost unnatural." He shifted his weight. "So about that water trade?" "I'm sorry," I said, stepping back. "I can't help you." The man's expression changed completely. The friendly mask dropped away, revealing something cold and calculating. "The rules are important here," he said, his voice lower now. "But sometimes they're incomplete." I didn't respond. I simply turned and walked back toward the station, not looking back even when I heard him call after me. When I glanced over my shoulder at the station, he was gone. That night I heard footsteps circling the station for the first time. Soft, rhythmic moving at a steady pace around the perimeter. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee, counting 1, 2, 3. The footsteps continued without pause. 40, 50, 60. At 97, the rhythm changed. The steps became irregular, faster, as if whatever was making them was becoming agitated. 100, 110, 120. I held my breath, waiting. 121, 122. Then silence. I stood up and retrieved the salt canister from the supply closet. As I moved from door to door, creating a thin line of white crystals across each threshold, I wondered what would have happened if the count had exceeded 120. The manual didn't say. The next morning, the salt lines were undisturbed. The logbook from the previous ranger contained an entry from 6 months ago. Footsteps count, 137. Salt applied, no breach. Below it, in a different handwriting, footsteps count, 151. Salt applied, minor breach, repaired fence section east wall. I began to understand that I wasn't the first ranger to encounter these anomalies, and I wouldn't be the last. The rules weren't just guidelines, they were survival strategies refined over years of experience. A week after the footsteps incident, a new sound began to haunt the station. It was faint, a distinct plink. Plink. Plink of a single drop of water hitting a metal surface. The first time I heard it, I methodically checked every faucet, pipe, and radiator in the building. All were dry. The sound seemed to come from the west service corridor, a narrow, windowless hallway that ran behind the main room and housed the station's electrical and plumbing junctions. The manual hadn't mentioned the corridor specifically, but a small taped-on addendum inside the junction box itself read, "If dripping is heard from the corridor when all systems are dry, verify the source visually during daylight hours only. Do not enter after dark." The next day, I took a powerful flashlight and entered the corridor. It was cramped, smelling of dust and old copper wiring. I traced every pipe, ran my hands over every connection, and found no sign of moisture, no corrosion, no source for the sound. The concrete floor was bone dry. I stood there for 10 minutes, listening to the silence, convinced I was imagining things. That night, at precisely 11:05 p.m., the dripping started again. Plink, plink, plink. It was maddeningly regular, exactly 15 seconds between each drop. I sat in the main room, a book open in my lap, and tried to ignore it. I timed the intervals with my watch. 4 drips per minute, 240 drips per hour. By 2 a.m., when I covered the bathroom mirror, the sound had woven itself into the fabric of the night. It was still there when I woke at sunrise. The corridor remained dry. The sound became a part of my routine, a metronome for the long hours of darkness, a reminder that the station itself was not entirely stable. 2 days after the dripping started, I encountered another hiker on the North Trail. This one was different. He was tall and gaunt, dressed in worn but clean hiking clothes. He didn't speak as I approached, simply stopped and watched me. I nodded a greeting, which he didn't return. He just stood there, his hands in his pockets, his expression unnervingly blank. After a moment of silence, he raised a hand and pointed, not back down the trail, but perpendicular to it, into the dense, unmarked forest. I followed the direction of his finger with my eyes. There was nothing there but trees and undergrowth. "Lost?" I asked. He didn't answer. He just kept pointing, his arm unwavering. I felt a prickle of unease. The rules didn't cover silent hikers. They covered food, water, names, and times. They didn't cover what to do when someone communicated without a single word. "I can't let you go that way," I said, my voice firm. "It's unsafe. The marked trail is back this way." He slowly lowered his arm, then pointed again, this time at his own mouth and then back at the forest. The gesture was clear. He couldn't speak, and he wanted me to go where he was pointing. The temptation was to follow, to see what was so important it warranted this strange, silent pantomime. But the core of every rule was about not engaging, not being lured off the prescribed path. "I'm sorry," I said, taking a step back. "I can't help you." The hiker's face for the first time changed. The blankness fell away, replaced by a look of profound disappointment, almost sorrow. He lowered his arm, turned, and walked silently into the trees he had been pointing at, disappearing without a sound. I stood there for a long time, staring at the spot where he'd vanished, the dripping sound from the corridor echoing in my memory. I had followed the rules by not following him, but it felt like a failure nonetheless. My second month at Blackwood brought new challenges. The seasonal change brought heavier rains and thicker fog that reduced visibility to mere feet some days. During one perimeter check, I found a circle of stones arranged perfectly on the ground just outside the fence, each stone the same size and shape. Rule 10 was clear. Do not disturb circles. Note the location and continue. I documented the circle in my logbook, noting its distance from the station, 37 yards from the north gate, and its diameter, exactly 6 feet. When I checked the next day, the circle was gone, but the ground where it had been was darker, as if burned. On a Tuesday night, the radio call at 10:00 p.m. brought an unexpected response. "Position confirmed," said the familiar distorted voice. Then after a pause, "Protocol amendment required. New rules added to manual. Over." I found the amendments in the same locked drawer, written on fresh paper in the same neat block letters as the original rules. 15. If you encounter a child alone in the park, do not approach. Note their location and continue patrol. Children do not hike alone in Blackwood. 16. The trail cameras at markers 4, 11, and 19 will sometimes show images that haven't happened yet. Do not attempt to change these events. 17. If you find feathers arranged in patterns on the ground, count them. If the number is divisible by 3, stay indoors until sunrise. 18. Never use the South Trail after midnight. The path changes after dark. 19. If the station lights flicker exactly 3 times, check all door locks immediately. Something is testing the boundaries. 20. The west bathroom is off limits during thunderstorms. Use the east bathroom only. 21. If you hear whistling in the forest, identify the tune. If you cannot identify it, remain silent until it stops. 22. Sometimes hikers will ask questions about previous rangers. Do not answer. Their knowledge is a test. 23. If you encounter animal tracks that change direction mid-stride, leave the area immediately. 24. The iron keys must be rotated weekly. Monday, key 1 on north door, key 2 on east door. Wednesday, key 3 on south door, key 4 on west door. Friday, all keys return to locked drawer. The new rules brought a fresh wave of anxiety. I had been settling into a routine, convincing myself that I understood the boundaries of my job. Now those boundaries had shifted, expanded to include new threats I hadn't imagined. 3 days after receiving the amendments, I encountered a child on the North Trail. She couldn't have been more than 7 years old. wearing a bright red jacket that stood out against the muted forest colors. She was sitting on a log, crying softly. Rule 15 was explicit: do not approach children alone in the park, but every instinct as a human being, as someone trained to help others, screamed at me to check on her. "Are you okay?" I called out from a distance. The child looked up, her face streaked with tears. "I'm lost," she said. "I can't find my daddy." I took a step forward, then stopped myself. "Stay where you are," I said. "I'll call for help on my radio." As I reached for the radio, the child stood up. "He told me you would say that," she said, her voice suddenly devoid of emotion. "He told me you would follow the rules." I froze, my hand halfway to my radio. "Who told you?" The child smiled, and it was the same wrong smile I'd seen on the hiker weeks ago. The one who lives in the trees, the one who watches you count the fence posts, the one who sometimes adds an extra post just to see if you'll notice. I backed away slowly, not turning my back on her until I had put several yards between us. Then I walked quickly back to the station, not looking back even when I heard her humming behind me. That night, the station lights flickered exactly 3 times at 1:17 a.m. I moved through the building, checking each door lock, my hands shaking. All were secure. When I returned to the main room, the logbook was open to a blank page. On it, written in handwriting that wasn't mine, were 3 words. She was right. I closed the logbook and sat awake until sunrise, iron keys from the locked drawer spread on the table before me. The dripping in the corridor seemed louder that night, more insistent. Winter came early to Blackwood. Snow blanketed the preserve in early October, transforming the landscape into a pristine white canvas that somehow made the anomalies more visible. During a patrol of the East Trail, I found animal tracks that changed direction mid-stride, deer prints that suddenly reversed without any turning movement, as if the deer had simply rotated in place. I followed the tracks for about 50 yards before remembering Rule 23. Leave immediately. The snow made it easy to retrace my steps, but as I walked back, I noticed new tracks alongside my own. Human footprints that hadn't been there minutes before. The station felt more isolated than ever. The radio calls continued each night at 10:00 p.m. Always the same distorted voice confirming my position. Sometimes I thought I heard other voices beneath it, whispering just beyond comprehension. The dripping in the corridor continued its relentless rhythm, a constant companion to the static. On a particularly cold night in November, the station's heating system failed. The temperature dropped rapidly, and I found myself shivering despite wearing multiple layers. The manual had no protocol for heating failure, so I improvised, wrapping myself in blankets and making hot coffee on the camping stove. At 2:47 a.m., I heard knocking at the back door. 3 distinct raps, spaced evenly. I sat perfectly still, remembering Rule 2. Do not acknowledge knocking between 8:30 p.m. and 9:15 p.m., but it was well past that time. The manual didn't prohibit acknowledging knocking at other times. The knocking came again, this time more insistent. "Ranger," called a voice. "It's Deputy Miller from the county sheriff's office. My truck broke down about a mile from here. Can I come in and warm up?" I approached the back door cautiously, peering through the peephole. A man in a sheriff's uniform stood on the porch, his breath visible in the cold air. He looked authentic, but Rule 14 echoed in my mind. Verify identity by asking about the weather yesterday. "Deputy," I called through the door. "Cold snap came in fast yesterday, didn't it?" The man nodded. "Sure did. Dropped 20 degrees in just a few hours, almost unnatural." The phrase "almost unnatural" triggered a memory. The hiker months ago had used the same words. I remained silent, my hand on the door lock but not turning it. "Ranger," the deputy called. "You still there? It's getting colder out here." I didn't respond. After a minute, I heard him sigh. Fine. Have it your way. Then footsteps crunching in the snow, moving away from the station. I waited 10 minutes before looking out the window. The porch was empty, but there were no footprints leading away from the door, only the ones that had approached it. The next morning, I found a sheriff's department badge frozen into the ice on the back porch railing. I left it there following no specific rule but a deep instinct that touching it would be a mistake. The encounter with the false deputy gnawed at me in a new way. The other anomalies were strange, unnatural, but they felt part of the park's established weirdness. This was different. It was an impersonation, an infiltration of the real-world systems. It made me question not just the forest, but the boundaries of reality itself. 2 days later, during a lull in a snowstorm, I used the station's antiquated computer to try and access the county sheriff's office employee database. The connection was agonizingly slow, the dial-up modem screeching like a dying animal. After 20 minutes, the database loaded. I searched for Miller. The results returned 3 names: a dispatcher, a records clerk, and a retired deputy named Frank Miller, who had left the force 22 years ago. There was no active-duty Deputy Miller. I tried searching for the badge number I'd seen on the frozen badge. The search returned no results. The number didn't exist. I sat back in the chair, the snow pattering against the window, the dripping in the service corridor keeping its steady rhythm. The threat wasn't just at the fence line anymore. It was wearing a uniform and a face that looked like it belonged, carrying credentials that were a complete fiction. The rules were a shield, but what happened when the enemy knew how to make shields? A week after my investigation, a new anomaly appeared. During my morning inventory, I discovered a single can of peaches was missing from the pantry. I double-checked the count, reviewed the logbook from the previous day. The inventory had been correct. I noted the missing item as per Rule 13 and decided not to replace it. 2 days later, while on patrol near Marker 9, I saw a glint of metal in the undergrowth about 20 yards off the trail. I knew I shouldn't leave the trail, but the distance was short and my curiosity was piqued. I carefully made my way to the spot and found the missing can of peaches, its label pristine, sitting on a flat rock as if placed there for me to find. Rule 28, which I had not yet received, echoed in my mind as a premonition. If you find items from your station in the forest, do not retrieve them. They are no longer yours. I left the can there, a knot of cold dread tightening in my stomach. It wasn't just taking things anymore. It was giving them back, like a cat leaving a dead bird on the doorstep. A gift, a warning. December brought the longest nights of the year, and with them the most challenging experiences. The snow made travel difficult, limiting my patrols to the areas immediately surrounding the station. During one perimeter check, I found feathers arranged in a perfect spiral on the ground outside the fence. I counted them carefully, 27 divisible by 3. I returned to the station and remained indoors until sunrise, as Rule 17 required. From the window I watched as something moved in the trees beyond the feathers, tall and thin with limbs that bent at impossible angles. It never approached the station, simply circled the area where the feathers lay, occasionally stopping to look toward the building with eyes that caught the faint light and reflected it back as red. Christmas Eve was the worst night. A blizzard moved in around 7 p.m., reducing visibility to almost zero. The radio call at 10 p.m. came through with heavy static, the voice barely recognizable. Position, confirmed, emergency. Protocols, over. I found the emergency protocols in the locked drawer, written on red paper this time. Emergency Protocol 1. During severe weather events, maintain a visual watch on all approaches to the station. Do not rely solely on cameras. Emergency Protocol 2. If the power fails during a storm, light 3 lanterns and place them in a triangle formation in the main room. Do not leave this triangle until power is restored. Emergency Protocol 3. If you hear voices calling for help outside during a storm, do not respond. Help is not what they seek. Emergency Protocol 4. During whiteout conditions, check the perimeter every hour. If you find footprints leading to the station but none leading away, seal all doors and windows with tape. Emergency Protocol 5. If something attempts to enter the station during a storm, do not engage. Read from the manual aloud until it stops. The power failed at 11:43 p.m. The station plunged into darkness, the emergency generator failing to kick in. I fumbled for my flashlight, then remembered Protocol 2. I found 3 battery-powered lanterns in the supply closet and arranged them in a triangle on the floor of the main room. I sat in the center, the manual in my lap, and waited. At 12:17 a.m., I heard voices outside, multiple voices calling for help. "Please," one cried, "my child is hurt." "We're lost," another called. "The storm came up so fast." Protocol 3 was clear: do not respond. I sat in silence, listening as the voices became more desperate, then angry, then something else entirely. Inhuman sounds that no human throat could produce. At 1 a.m., I performed my perimeter check as required by Protocol 4. The snow was falling heavily, already covering any tracks that might have been there. I circled the station quickly, my flashlight beam cutting through the swirling white. When I returned to the north side of the station, I found them. Footprints leading directly to the door, but none leading away. Something had approached the station while I was checking the other sides. My heart pounding, I returned inside and began sealing doors and windows with duct tape as specified in Protocol 4. I worked methodically, starting with the north door and moving clockwise. When I reached the west window, I saw a face pressed against the glass, pale, with eyes too large for a human face. It smiled when it saw me, revealing teeth that were pointed and too numerous. I continued sealing the window without breaking eye contact, my hands shaking but steady. When I had finished, the face disappeared back into the storm. At 2:30 a.m., something began pounding on the doors, not knocking, but heavy. Rhythmic impacts that shook the entire station. I moved to the center of my lantern triangle, opened the manual to a random page, and began reading aloud as Protocol 5 instructed. 57. If you encounter a hiker who claims to be a former ranger, do not engage in conversation. Ask about the weather yesterday. If they answer correctly, note their description in the logbook and avoid them for the remainder of your shift. The pounding intensified. I continued reading, my voice steady despite my fear. 82. The storage shed behind the station is sometimes larger on the inside than the outside. Do not enter it after dark. The door splintered, the wood cracking near the lock. I raised my voice, continuing to read. 94. Sometimes the trail markers will rearrange themselves overnight. Do not attempt to return them to their original positions. Note the changes and adjust your patrol routes accordingly. The pounding stopped suddenly. I kept reading for another 10 minutes before allowing myself to fall silent. The station was quiet except for the sound of the wind and my own breathing. The power returned at 5:48 a.m. The sun rose an hour later, revealing a landscape transformed by the storm. The north door was damaged but still secure, the duct tape holding. When I went outside to check the perimeter, I found no footprints anywhere, as if the night before had been a dream. But the logbook lay open on the table to a new page. On it were written words that hadn't been there when I went to sleep. You followed the protocols well. Not all do. January brought a new ranger to Station 18, 15 miles to the east. His name was Tom, and he was younger than me, early 20s, with an optimism that I envied and feared for. We met at the monthly supply drop, a brief exchange of information and supplies that always felt rushed. Strange things happen out here, Tom said as we loaded boxes into our respective vehicles. The manual they gave me reads like a horror novel. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. I had learned that some things were better left unsaid. Found a circle of stones near my station last week, Tom continued. Perfectly arranged, each one the same size, almost like someone measured them. Did you touch them? I asked, my voice tighter than I intended. No, the manual said not to, but I took pictures. Want to see? I shook my head. Some things are better left undocumented. Tom looked at me curiously. You've been here longer than anyone else, right? Since the summer? June, I confirmed. What have you seen? He asked, his voice lowering. For real, not just the manual stuff. I considered how to answer. The rules didn't prohibit sharing information with other rangers, but experience had taught me that knowledge could be dangerous. Follow the rules, I said finally. Even when they don't make sense, especially when they don't make sense. Tom nodded, though I could see he wasn't satisfied with my answer. As we finished loading our supplies, I felt a strange urge to warn him more specifically, to tell him about the extra fence post, about the child in the red jacket, about the face at the window during the storm. But I didn't. Some lessons must be learned firsthand. February was quiet, the deep snow keeping even the anomalies at bay. I spent my days performing routine maintenance and my nights following the protocols without incident. I began to relax, to convince myself that the worst was over. I was wrong. On March 3rd, during my afternoon patrol, I found something new at Marker 22, the cabin that Rule 6 explicitly forbade approaching within 50 yards of. The cabin door was standing open. From my position at exactly 50 yards, I could see inside the cabin. Furniture was overturned as if there had been a struggle. On the floor lay a body, unmoving, dressed in a ranger's uniform. My first instinct was to approach to check if the person needed help. But Rule 6 was absolute. Do not approach within 50 yards. I stood frozen, torn between duty and protocol. Then I noticed something else. The ranger's uniform. It was the same shade of green as mine. But the shoulder patch was different. Not the Blackwood National Preserve logo, but something I didn't recognize. A tree with roots that extended upward rather than downward. As I watched, the body on the floor stirred, then slowly stood up. It turned toward me, and I saw that its face was featureless, smooth as an eggshell. It raised a hand and waved, a gesture that was somehow more terrifying than any threat. I backed away slowly, then turned and walked back to the station, my heart pounding. When I arrived, I immediately radioed for help on Channel 3 using the standard call sign. The response came immediately, but it wasn't the distorted voice I had come to expect. "We know about the cabin," said a new voice, clear and feminine. "Protocol violation noted. Return to your station and await further instructions." I spent the rest of the day in the station, jumping at every sound. At 10 p.m., I made my regular radio call, but there was no response. I tried again at 10:05 p.m., then 10:10 p.m. Silence. At 11:30 p.m., I found new amendments slipped under the door, written on the same paper as the original rules, but in a different handwriting. 25. If you see another ranger at the cabin, they are not a ranger. Document the sighting, but do not approach. 26. The radio may occasionally fall silent. Continue making calls at scheduled times. Do not attempt other channels. 27. Sometimes the fence posts will change number. Document the new count, but do not acknowledge the change. 28. If you find items from your station in the forest, do not retrieve them. They are no longer yours. 29. The face in the mirror may sometimes not be your own. Do not react. Simply cover the mirror as scheduled. 30. If you hear music coming from the forest, identify the instrument. If you cannot, remain indoors until it stops. 31. Sometimes the trees will whisper your name. Do not answer. 32. The salt lines may sometimes disappear overnight. Reapply them immediately. 33. If you encounter a door where none should be, do not open it. 34. The manual may sometimes add new rules without explanation. Follow them. The new rules brought a fresh wave of anxiety, but also a strange sense of validation. I wasn't crazy. Others had experienced these things too, had codified them into rules designed to keep whoever came next safe. Spring came slowly to Blackwood, the snow melting to reveal a forest that seemed somehow older than it had been the previous year. The trees stood taller, their branches thicker, their shadows deeper. During patrols, I often found items that had gone missing from the station: a flashlight, a canteen, even one of the iron keys. Following Rule 28, I left them where they lay. In April, I encountered another ranger on the East Trail. He was older, maybe in his 60s, with a weathered face and a confident stride. His uniform matched mine exactly. "Afternoon," he called out as he approached. "Beautiful day for a patrol?" I stopped, remembering Rule 14. "Hot yesterday," I said casually. "Unusual for this time of year." The man nodded. "Sure was. Almost unnatural." The phrase again. I remained silent, my hand moving toward the iron key in my pocket. "Relax, Braid, son," the man said, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "I'm not here to test you. I'm here to warn you." "Warn me about what?" "They're getting stronger," he said, his voice lowering. "The rules used to be enough. Now they're just guidelines, suggestions." "Who's getting stronger?" The man looked around as if afraid of being overheard. "The ones who made the rules. The ones who sometimes add extra fence posts. The ones who live in the trees." He stepped closer. "They're interested in you. You've lasted longer than most." I backed away. "I need to complete my patrol." "Listen to me," the man said, his voice urgent. "The rules aren't protection anymore, they're a test, and you're close to passing." "Passing what?" The man smiled, and this time it reached his eyes, which I now saw were entirely black, with no whites or irises. "The final test. The one where you stop following the rules and start making your own." I turned and walked away quickly, not looking back even when I heard him call after me. When I glanced over my shoulder a few minutes later, he was gone. That night I found a new door inside the station, a plain wooden door that hadn't been there that morning, standing in the wall between the supply closet and the bathroom. Rule 33 echoed in my mind. If you encounter a door where none should be, do not open it. I placed a chair against the door and continued my rounds, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. At 2 a.m., as I went to cover the bathroom mirror, I noticed the door was gone, the wall seamless as if it had never been interrupted. May brought the anniversary of my arrival at Blackwood. 1 year. I had survived longer than the previous ranger, whose logbook entries had stopped abruptly in May of the previous year. I had followed the rules, documented the anomalies, and maintained my sanity mostly. During a patrol on May 15th, I found Tom from Station 18 sitting on a log near Marker 11. He looked exhausted, his uniform dirty and torn. "Tom," I called out, keeping my distance, "what are you doing here? This is outside your patrol area." He looked up, and I saw that his eyes had the same dead quality as the hikers months ago. "The rules are lies," he said. "They're not meant to protect us. They're meant to keep us contained." "What happened to you?" "I broke a rule," he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I approached the cabin at Marker 22. I wanted to see what was inside. And I learned the truth," he said, standing up. "The rules aren't there to keep things out. They're there to keep us in." I backed away slowly. "You need to return to your station." "My station?" Tom laughed, a sound that was somehow worse than the inhuman noises I'd heard during the storm. "I don't have a station anymore. I have a purpose." "And what's that?" "To show others the truth," he said, moving toward me. "Starting with you." I turned and ran, not looking back even when I heard him following. I didn't stop until I reached the station, locking the door behind me and immediately checking the perimeter. 47 posts. No extra one today. That night, the radio call brought a new voice, one I recognized immediately. Tom's. "Position confirmed," he said, the distortion unable to completely hide his familiar tone. "All clear, over." I didn't respond. I simply sat in the main room, iron keys spread on the table before me, and waited for sunrise. Summer arrived with oppressive heat and humidity that made the forest feel like a jungle. The anomalies increased in frequency, circles of feathers, tracks that changed direction, whispers in languages I couldn't identify. I followed the rules meticulously, documenting everything but never engaging. On July 4th, I found a child's red jacket hanging from a tree branch near marker 7. I didn't touch it, simply noting its location in my logbook and continuing my patrol. When I passed the same spot 3 hours later, the jacket was gone. In August, a new ranger was assigned to Station 18 to replace Tom. His name was Marcus, and he was perhaps the oldest ranger I had encountered. Late 50s, with a calm demeanor and eyes that had seen too much. "They told me you were still here," Marcus said when we met at the monthly supply drop. "Said you were the one to talk to if I had questions." I looked at him carefully, noting the weariness in his posture, the careful way he scanned the surrounding trees. "Ask about the weather yesterday," I said. Marcus smiled faintly. "Already did that with the dispatcher. Hot yesterday. Unusual for this time of year." "Almost unnatural?" I suggested. "Almost," he agreed. "So what's the real advice beyond the manual?" "The rules are important," I said, choosing my words carefully. "But understanding why they exist is more important." "And why do they exist?" I considered how to answer. "To keep us safe, to keep us separate, to remind us that we're not in control." Marcus nodded slowly. "I thought as much. Station 17, when it's different from the others, isn't it?" "Different how?" "More active," he said. "The things that happen here, they're not random, they're focused." "On what?" "On whoever is here," Marcus said simply. "On you." The realization settled over me like a shroud. The anomalies weren't random occurrences, they were directed, test after test after test. "What happens when you stop passing the tests?" I asked. Marcus's expression grew grim. "You don't want to know." September brought the first hints of fall, the leaves beginning to turn colors that seemed somehow too vibrant, too artificial. During a patrol of the South Trail, I found a series of photographs scattered on the ground. Images of the station, of me performing perimeter checks, of me sleeping in my bed. I didn't touch them, simply noting their location in my logbook. That night, the radio call brought a new voice, one that sounded disturbingly like my own. "Position confirmed," it said. "All clear, over." I didn't respond. I simply sat in the main room, iron keys spread on the table before me, and listened to the silence that followed. October brought the anniversary of the blizzard, and with it, a sense of dread that I couldn't shake. I spent the days performing extra patrols, checking the perimeter twice instead of once, inventorying supplies daily instead of weekly. I knew something was coming. On the night of October 31st, Halloween, the power failed at exactly 11:43 p.m., the same time it had failed during the blizzard. I arranged the 3 lanterns in a triangle and sat in the center, manual in hand. At midnight, I heard it, music coming from the forest, a violin playing a melody I didn't recognize. Rule 30 echoed in my mind. If you hear music coming from the forest, identify the instrument. If you cannot, remain indoors until it stops. I remained indoors, listening as the violin played on, the melody growing more complex, more beautiful. I found myself wanting to go outside to find the source of the music, to see who was playing. At 1 a.m., I performed my perimeter check as required by Protocol 4. The moon was full, casting long shadows across the ground. As I circled the station, I saw footprints leading to each door, but none leading away. When I returned to the north side of the station, I saw him. A figure standing at the edge of the trees, violin raised to his chin. He was tall and thin, dressed in formal wear that seemed out of place in the forest. As he played, he watched me, his eyes reflecting the moonlight as red points. I continued my perimeter check, trying to ignore the music, the figure, the eyes that followed my every move. When I completed the circle and returned to the north side, the figure was gone, but the music continued. At 2:30 a.m., something began pounding on the doors, not knocking but heavy rhythmic impacts that shook the entire station. I moved to the center of my lantern triangle, opened the manual to a random page, and began reading aloud. 117. Sometimes the trees will move when you're not looking at them. Do not comment on their new positions. The pounding intensified. I continued reading, my voice steady despite my fear. 123. If you find a door that leads to the outside but opens to the inside, do not use it. Note its location and avoid it. The door splintered, the wood cracking near the lock. I raised my voice, continuing to read. 131. The faces in the window may sometimes be familiar. Do not acknowledge them. They are not who they appear to be. The pounding stopped suddenly. I kept reading for another 10 minutes before allowing myself to fall silent. The station was quiet except for the sound of the violin, which continued until dawn. November came with a sense of finality, as if the forest itself was preparing for an ending. The anomalies became more personal. A photograph of my parents on their wedding day appearing on my pillow. My childhood dog's bark coming from the woods, my mother's voice calling my name from just beyond the fence. I followed the rules meticulously, documenting everything but never engaging. I was being tested, pushed to my limits, but I refused to break. On November 15th, I found a new rule slipped under the door, written on the same paper as the original rules, but in handwriting I didn't recognize. 35. The final test is not about breaking the rules. It's about understanding when to make your own. I sat with this rule for hours, turning it over in my mind. All this time I had thought survival meant perfect compliance. But what if compliance was just another test? What if the real test was knowing when to break the rules? That night I heard a child crying outside the station. A sound I remembered from months ago. The child in the red jacket. Rule 15 was explicit. Do not approach children alone in the park, but Rule 35 suggested something different. I went to the door, my hand on the lock. The crying continued. Heartbreaking in its intensity. I counted to 10, then 20, then 30. Finally, I unlocked the door and stepped outside. The child stood at the edge of the trees, her red jacket bright against the dark bark. I knew you would come, she said, her voice devoid of the tears I had heard moments before. I'm here to help, I said, my voice steady. What do you need? The child smiled, and it was the same wrong smile I had seen before. I need you to understand, she said. The rules aren't protection, they're containment. Containment from what? From yourself, she said, taking a step closer. From what you could become if you stopped being afraid. I stood my ground. And what could I become? Like us, she said, her form shifting, changing, becoming something taller, thinner, with limbs that bent at impossible angles. Free. I didn't run. I didn't retreat. I simply watched as the transformation completed, as the child became something else entirely, something that had been testing me for months, waiting to see if I would break or evolve. The rules were guidelines, I said, understanding dawning. Not requirements. The creature nodded, its two large eyes reflecting the station lights as red points. Some are meant to be followed. Some are meant to be broken. The trick is knowing which is which. And the final test. Is realizing you don't need to be tested anymore, it said. Is understanding that you can make your own rules now. I looked back at the station, at the home I had known for over a year, at the prison I had gradually come to accept. Then I looked at the creature, at the freedom it offered, at the price of that freedom. I need time to think, I said. The creature nodded. You have until sunrise, then the choice must be made. I returned to the station and sat at the table, iron keys spread before me. For hours I reviewed the rules, the amendments, the protocols, trying to understand which were meant to protect and which were meant to contain. As dawn approached, I made my decision. I gathered the manual, the amendments, the protocols, and arranged them neatly on the table. Then I took a fresh sheet of paper and began to write. My rules were simpler, more direct. They acknowledged the reality of Blackwood without surrendering to it. They established boundaries without creating prisons. They were my rules, not someone else's. 1. Acknowledge the extra post. Its presence is a reminder, not a threat. 2. The mirror is for checking yourself, not for looking for others. Cover it when you need to rest from being watched. 3. A knock at any hour is a request. You are not obligated to answer. 4. The dripping in the corridor is just the house settling. Ignore it. 5. If a voice uses the name of someone you love, it is a stranger. Do not grant it the power of that name. 6. The violin is just music. You can listen from the window. As the sun rose, I took my rules and walked to the edge of the forest, to the spot where the creature had appeared the night before. I left the pages there, waited with a stone, then returned to the station. The creature was gone. The forest looked the same as it always had, but somehow different, less threatening, more neutral. The test was over. I had passed, or perhaps I had failed. It was hard to say anymore. December brought a new ranger to Station 18, replacing Marcus, who had retired without explanation. His name was Daniel, and he was perhaps the youngest ranger I had encountered. Early 20s, with the same optimism I remembered seeing in Tom months ago. We met at the monthly supply drop, a brief exchange of information and supplies that felt familiar and strange at the same time. They told me you were the one to talk to if I had questions, Daniel said as we loaded boxes into our respective vehicles. Said you'd been here the longest. I nodded, remembering my first meeting with Tom with Marcus. The manual they gave you reads like a horror novel, I said, echoing Tom's words from months ago. Daniel laughed. That's an understatement. Some of these rules, they can't be serious, can they? I looked at him, at the hope and skepticism in his eyes, and remembered my own arrival at Blackwood. Some are more serious than others, I said carefully. Which ones? He asked, his voice lowering. For real, not just the manual stuff. I considered how to answer. I had written my own rules, but that didn't mean the original ones were useless. They served a purpose, even if that purpose wasn't what I had initially thought. Follow them all, I said finally. At first, learn which ones matter to you, which ones keep you safe, which ones keep you sane. Then make your own decisions. Daniel looked at me curiously. That's not the advice I was expecting. It's the only advice that matters, I said, closing the tailgate of my truck. The rest, you'll figure it out on your own. As I drove back to Station 17, I thought about the rules I had written, about the choice I had made at dawn. Had I become one of them, or something new entirely? It was hard to say anymore. Back at the station, I performed my perimeter check, counting the fence posts. 47. No extra one today. Inside, I sat at the table and opened the logbook to a fresh page. After a moment's hesitation, I began to write, not the official log, but something else, something for the next ranger who would come after me, whenever that might be. The rules are important, I wrote, but understanding why they exist is more important. Some are meant to protect you. Some are meant to contain you. The trick is knowing which is which. I paused, considering how much to reveal, how much to keep hidden. Sometimes you'll see things that don't make sense. A fence post that wasn't there before, a child who shouldn't be alone in the forest, a deer with 6 legs. Document these things, but don't try to understand them, not at first. I looked around the station at the home that had become my prison, then my testing ground, then something else entirely. Eventually, you'll need to make your own rules, not to replace the existing ones, but to supplement them. Your rules should reflect your understanding of Blackwood, your relationship with it, your place within it. I closed the logbook and leaned back in my chair, exhausted but clear-headed. Outside, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the preserve. Soon it would be time to lock the windows, to perform the radio check, to cover the mirror. But not yet. For now, there was just the quiet of the station, the peace of understanding, the freedom of knowing that some rules were meant to be followed, some were meant to be broken, and some were meant to be rewritten entirely. Back at the station, I performed my perimeter check, counting the fence posts. 47. No extra one today. Inside, I sat at the table and opened the logbook to a fresh page. After a moment's hesitation, I began to write. Not the official log, but something else, something for the next ranger who would come after me, whenever that might be. The rules are important, I wrote, but understanding why they exist is more important. Some are meant to protect you. Some are meant to contain you. The trick is knowing which is which. I paused, considering how much to reveal, how much to keep hidden. Sometimes you'll see things that don't make sense. A fence post that wasn't there before, a child who shouldn't be alone in the forest, a deer with 6 legs. Document these things, but don't try to understand them, not at first. I looked around the station at the home that had become my prison, then my testing ground, then something else entirely. Eventually, you'll need to make your own rules, not to replace the existing ones, but to supplement them. Your rules should reflect your understanding of Blackwood, your relationship with it, your place within it. I closed the logbook and leaned back in my chair, exhausted but clear-headed. Outside, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the preserve. Soon it would be time to lock the windows, to perform the radio check, to cover the mirror. But not yet. For now, there was just the quiet of the station, the peace of understanding, the freedom of knowing that some rules were meant to be followed, some were meant to be broken, and some were meant to be rewritten entirely. Winter settled over Blackwood with a determination that felt personal. The snow came early and heavy, blanketing the preserve in a pristine white that muffled all sound except the occasional creak of trees bending under the weight. December marked 18 months since my arrival, a duration that, according to the fragmented logs of previous rangers, was unprecedented. The first week of December brought a series of anomalies that tested my new understanding of the preserve. During my morning perimeter check on Tuesday, I found a perfect circle of ice frozen to the ground exactly 37 yards from the north gate, the same distance where I had once found a circle of stones. The ice was clear as glass, and frozen within it were objects that made my breath catch. My father's wristwatch, a key to my childhood home, a photograph of my college graduation. I stood there for a long time, the cold seeping through my boots. The original rules would have had me document the location and move on. My own rules suggested acknowledging what I saw without engaging. But this felt different, more personal, more invasive than anything I had encountered before. I documented the circle in the official logbook, noting the objects within the ice. Then I added a personal note to my hidden journal. It's learning what matters to me, testing whether I can separate memory from presence. That night, the dripping in the corridor stopped for the first time in months. The silence was more unsettling than the sound had been. I found myself listening for the plink, plink, plink that had become the metronome of my nights, straining to hear something that wasn't there. At 2 a.m., as I went to cover the bathroom mirror, I caught a glimpse of movement in my peripheral vision. When I turned, there was nothing there. But in the mirror before I covered it, I saw not my reflection but the forest at night, trees bending in a wind that wasn't blowing outside. I covered the mirror quickly, my heart racing. Rule 12 had always seemed arbitrary to me, but now I understood. The mirror wasn't just showing reflections, it was showing possibilities. The next morning, the circle of ice was gone. The ground where it had been was undisturbed, as if it had never been there. But when I returned to the station, I found my father's watch sitting on the kitchen table, its hands frozen at 3:47, a time that meant nothing to me, yet felt significant. I didn't touch the watch. I simply documented its appearance and continued my rounds. That night, the dripping resumed, exactly 15 seconds between each drop. Daniel from Station 18 called on the radio at 3:11 p.m. "Something weird is happening at my station," he said, his voice tight with tension. "Found footprints around the perimeter this morning. Big ones like nothing I've ever seen." "Human or animal?" I asked, making notes in my logbook. "Neither," Daniel said. "The stride is 12 feet, and they don't sink into the snow." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. "Are they approaching the station?" "Circling," Daniel replied, "always clockwise, always the same distance from the fence. I've been watching them for 6 hours. They haven't gotten any closer, but they haven't left either." The original rules had nothing to say about this situation. My own rules were silent as well. "How many posts around your station?" I asked. 42, Daniel said. "Why?" "Just checking," I replied, though I wasn't sure why I had asked. "Have you tried the salt?" "Already did, no effect. The footprints just continue through it as if it's not there." I thought for a moment. The original rules mention salt only for footsteps circling the station that exceed 120 and count. "Have you been counting?" "All day," Daniel said. "The count is at 437. They're not stopping." 437. The number felt significant, though I couldn't say why. "Try this," I said. "Go outside and acknowledge the footprints. Don't engage. Just let whatever is making them know that you see them." "That's against the rules," Daniel protested. "Some rules are meant to be broken," I said, carefully. There was silence on the other end for a full minute. Then Daniel's voice came back, shaky but determined. "I'm going out. I'll call you back." I waited by the radio, my attention divided between the silent corridor and the window where I could see the snow beginning to fall again. 47 minutes passed before Daniel called back. "They're gone," he said, his voice breathless. "I just stepped outside and said, 'I see you.' The footprints just faded, like they were never there." "Good," I said, though I wasn't sure it was good. "What else have you been experiencing?" "Nothing like this," Daniel admitted. "Just the usual stuff, the extra fence posts, the dripping, the voices. Nothing this direct." "The preserve is testing you," I said. "It wants to know how you'll respond when the rules don't work." "And how should I respond?" "Honestly," I said. "Not with fear or defiance, but with understanding. You're not here to conquer Blackwood. You're here to coexist with it." After we ended the call, I sat by the radio for a long time, thinking about what I had told Daniel. Was it true? Or was I just rationalizing my own approach to the impossible? That night, I found my father's watch on my pillow when I went to bed. This time, the hands had moved to 10 p.m., the time of the nightly radio check. I picked it up, feeling the cold metal against my skin. When I held it to my ear, I could hear a faint ticking, though the hands remained motionless. I carried the watch to the main room and placed it on the table next to the radio. At exactly 10 p.m., I made my call as usual. Station 17 requesting position check. Over. The response came immediately, the voice distorted but clear. Position confirmed. All clear. Over. As soon as the transmission ended, the watch on the table began to tick normally, the hands moving smoothly around the face. I watched it for an hour, mesmerized by the steady rhythm, the restoration of something that had been broken. At 11 p.m., I went to check the perimeter one last time before bed. The snow had stopped falling and the moon was full, casting the forest in silver light. As I approached the north gate, I saw a figure standing just beyond the fence, tall and thin with limbs that bent at impossible angles. It was the creature I had encountered at dawn months ago, the one that had offered me freedom in exchange for surrender. "You've changed," it said, its voice like wind through dead leaves. "I've learned," I replied, keeping my distance. "Learning is good," the creature said, "but understanding is better. Do you understand why you're here?" "To maintain the balance," I said, the words coming to me as if from somewhere else. "To be a bridge between what is and what could be." The creature nodded slowly. "And what happens when the bridge collapses?" "Another is built," I said, "or the gap is accepted as permanent." "Interesting," the creature said. "The previous rangers saw themselves as guards, prisoners, or victims. You see yourself as infrastructure." "Is that wrong?" I asked. "There is no wrong or right here," the creature replied. "There is only what works and what doesn't. What you're doing, it works. For now." With that, it turned and walked into the forest, disappearing between the trees as if they had parted to receive it. I stood there for a long time, the cold seeping into my bones. When I returned to the station, the watch on the table had stopped again, its hands frozen at 11:47 p.m. Christmas Eve brought the heaviest snowfall I had ever seen. By noon, the drifts were already 3 feet deep and showing no sign of stopping. I performed my perimeter check with difficulty, breaking a trail through the snow that would be erased by morning. 47 posts, no extra one today. At 4 p.m. the power failed. I wasn't surprised. The storm had been forecasted and the electrical system at Station 17 was antiquated at best. I found the battery-powered lanterns and arranged them in a triangle on the floor of the main room, following the emergency protocol I had learned during last year's blizzard. As darkness fell, the station grew colder. I wrapped myself in blankets and made coffee on the camping stove, watching through the window as the snow continued to fall. At 7 p.m. I heard it, faint at first, then growing clearer. The sound of carolers singing in the distance. I knew immediately that something was wrong. There were no other inhabitants of Blackwood besides myself and Daniel at Station 18, 15 miles away. The voices grew closer, the melodies familiar yet somehow wrong, the harmonies too perfect, the notes sustained just a little too long. At 8:30 p.m. I locked the windows as per Rule 2, pulling the curtains tight. The singing continued, now directly outside the station. I could make out the words clearly. "Silent night, holy night, all is calm, all is bright." But between the verses I heard something else. Whispers in a language I didn't recognize, words that felt like needles against my skin. At 10 p.m. I made my radio call as usual, my voice steady despite the singing that seemed to come from all directions at once. "Station 17 requesting position check. Over." The response came immediately, but it wasn't the distorted voice I had come to expect. It was Daniel's voice, clear and urgent. "Station 18 to Station 17, do you hear them too?" "Over." "Loud and clear," I replied. "What's happening at your station?" "The same," Daniel said. "Carols, but they're not right. The words keep changing when I'm not looking directly at them." Stay inside, I said. Don't engage, don't respond. I know the rules, Daniel replied, but they're getting louder, and I think I see faces in the snow. I looked out the window but could see nothing but the endless fall of white. Faces how? Pressing against the glass, Daniel said, his voice trembling. Too many eyes, too many mouths singing. Follow the emergency protocols, I said. Light the lanterns in a triangle. Stay in the center. Already done, Daniel replied. But the triangle isn't working this time. The cold is getting through. I thought for a moment. Try this. Acknowledge them without engaging. Thank them for the music, but explain that you're trying to rest. That's not in any rule, Daniel protested. Make your own, I said, carefully. There was silence on the other end for a full minute. Then Daniel's voice came back. Shaky but determined. I'm going to try. I'll call you back. I waited by the radio, the singing outside growing louder, more insistent. The melodies twisted around each other, creating harmonies that made my teeth ache. 47 minutes passed before Daniel called back. They're gone, he said, his voice breathless. I just said thank you for the carols, but it's time for quiet now. The singing just faded. The faces in the snow are gone too. Good, I said, though I wasn't sure it was good. What else have you been experiencing? Nothing like this, Daniel admitted. Just the usual stuff, the extra fence posts, the dripping, the voices, nothing this direct. The preserve is testing you, I said. It wants to know how you'll respond when the rules don't work. Honestly, I said, not with fear or defiance, but with understanding. You're not here to conquer Blackwood. You're here to coexist with it. After we ended the call, I sat by the radio for a long time, thinking about what I had told Daniel. Was it true, or was I just rationalizing my own approach to the impossible? That night I found my father's watch on my pillow when I went to bed. This time the hands had moved to 10 p.m., the time of the nightly radio check. I picked it up, feeling the cold metal against my skin. When I held it to my ear, I could hear a faint ticking, though the hands remained motionless. I carried the watch to the main room and placed it on the table next to the radio. At exactly 10 p.m., I made my call as usual. Station 17 requesting position check, over. The response came immediately, the voice distorted but clear. Position confirmed, all clear. Over. As soon as the transmission ended, the watch on the table began to tick normally, the hands moving smoothly around the face. I watched it for an hour, mesmerized by the steady rhythm, the restoration of something that had been broken. At 11 p.m., I went to check the perimeter one last time before bed. The snow had stopped falling and the moon was full, casting the forest in silver light. As I approached the north gate, I saw a figure standing just beyond the fence, tall and thin with limbs that bent at impossible angles. It was the creature I had encountered at dawn months ago, the one that had offered me freedom in exchange for surrender. You've changed, it said, its voice like wind through dead leaves. I've learned, I replied, keeping my distance. Learning is good, the creature said, but understanding is better. Do you understand why you're here? To maintain the balance, I said, the words coming to me as if from somewhere else. To be a bridge between what is and what could be. The creature nodded slowly. And what happens when the bridge collapses? Another is built, I said, or the gap is accepted as permanent. Interesting, the creature said. The previous rangers saw themselves as guards, prisoners, or victims. You see yourself as infrastructure. Is that wrong? I asked. There is no wrong or right here, the creature replied. There is only what works and what doesn't. What you're doing, it works, for now. With that, it turned and walked into the forest, disappearing between the trees as if they had parted to receive it. I stood there for a long time, the cold seeping into my bones. When I returned to the station, The watch on the table had stopped again, its hands frozen at 11:47 p.m. Christmas Day dawned clear and cold, the sun glinting off a landscape transformed by the storm. The power returned at 6:17 a.m., the heaters kicking on with a groan of protest. I performed my perimeter check, finding 47 posts as expected. The snow was undisturbed except for my own tracks, as if the carolers of the previous night had never existed. When I returned to the station, I found a small gift-wrapped box sitting on the kitchen table. It hadn't been there when I went to bed. I approached it cautiously, noting the neat wrapping paper, the simple red bow, the tag that read simply, "For the bridge." I opened the box carefully. Inside, nestled in tissue paper, was a snow globe. But it wasn't a typical snow globe with a tiny house or tree inside. It was a perfect replica of Station 17, complete with the tower and its blinking red light. When I shook it, the snow that fell wasn't white, but a rainbow of colors that swirled together before settling. I placed the snow globe on the windowsill where it caught the morning light. As I watched, the tiny light on the tower began to blink in time with the real one outside. I picked it up again and turned it over. On the bottom, engraved in elegant script, were the words, "All times are now, all places are here." January brought the new year and a deep cold that froze the preserve solid. The trees stood like skeletons against the sky, their branches brittle with ice. During my morning patrol on January 5th, I found something new at Marker 12. A perfectly formed ice sculpture of a deer with 6 legs, its head turned as if watching me approach. Rule 3 was clear. If I encountered a deer with 6 legs, I should document it but not attempt to photograph it. But this wasn't a living deer. It was ice, art, something created rather than something born. I stood there for a long time, studying the details, the individual muscles visible beneath the translucent surface, the delicate veins in the ears, the eyes that seemed to follow me as I moved. I documented the sculpture in my logbook, noting its location and appearance. Then I added a personal note to my hidden journal. It's showing me what it can create. The question is whether it's showing off or threatening. That night, the station grew colder than ever before. I wrapped myself in multiple layers and sat at the kitchen table with a cup of hot coffee, watching my breath fog in the air. At 11:47 p.m., the same time shown on my father's watch the night before, I heard a new sound. A single clear note played on what sounded like a cello. The note hung in the air for a full minute before fading into silence. 10 minutes later, another note played, this one lower than the first. I recognized the pattern immediately. It was the same interval as the dripping in the corridor, but slowed down, stretched out, made more deliberate. I sat in silence, listening to the music that wasn't there, wondering what it meant. At 2 a.m., as I went to cover the bathroom mirror, I caught a glimpse of movement in my peripheral vision. When I turned, there was nothing there. But in the mirror before I covered it, I saw not my reflection, but the ice deer from Marker 12, its 6 legs folded beneath it, its breath visible in the cold. I covered the mirror quickly, my heart racing. The boundaries between inside and outside, between what was real and what was reflected, were becoming more porous. The next morning, I found a single ice feather on my pillow, perfectly formed, melting slowly in the warmth of the room. I watched it until it disappeared into a puddle of water, wondering what message it carried. Daniel called it noon, his voice strained. Something's happening at my station, the fence posts. They're changing. Changing how? I asked, making notes in my logbook. They're rearranging themselves, Daniel said. I counted 42 this morning, which is correct. But an hour later, there were 43. Now there are 41. They're moving when I'm not looking. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. Are you documenting the changes? Yes, but that's not the weirdest part, Daniel continued. The extra posts aren't like the others. They're Different, carved with symbols I don't recognize. Can you describe them? Like tree roots that grow upward instead of down, Daniel said. Like the one on the ranger's uniform at the cabin. I sat up straight, my full attention now focused on the conversation. Have you been to the cabin at marker 22? No, Daniel said quickly. I follow the rules, but I can see it from here sometimes. On clear days, the door is open again. Stay away from it, I said, my voice firm. Rule 6 is absolute for a reason. I know, Daniel replied, but it's like it's calling to me. I keep dreaming about what's inside. Dreams are just dreams, I said, though I knew better in Blackwood. These are different, Daniel insisted. They feel real. Last night I dreamed I went inside and found another manual, one that explained what the preserve really is. And what is it? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. A library, Daniel said, his voice dropping to a whisper. A collection of all the places that have been forgotten, all the stories that have been lost. We're not rangers here, we're librarians. The word hung in the air between us. Librarians. It made a strange kind of sense. The cataloging of anomalies, the documentation of impossible events, the careful preservation of knowledge that couldn't be shared with the outside world. Did the manual say what happens when the books start rearranging themselves? I asked. It said that's when the librarian needs to decide whether to maintain the old system or create a new one, Daniel replied. It said that's the test. After we ended the call, I sat by the radio for a long time thinking about what Daniel had said. A library of forgotten places, a collection of lost stories. It explained so much, the sense of history in the forest, the feeling that the trees remembered everything that had ever happened here, the way the anomalies seemed to follow patterns that were almost but not quite logical. That night I dreamed of the station as a library, the walls lined with books that had no titles, the shelves extending upward into darkness. As I walked between them, books would occasionally fall to the floor, opening to reveal pages filled with symbols I couldn't read but somehow understood. When I woke at dawn, the logbook on the kitchen table was open to a blank page. On it, written in handwriting that wasn't mine, were 3 words. Which system works? February brought the thaw, the snow melting to reveal a forest that seemed somehow older than it had been the previous year. The trees stood taller, their branches thicker, their shadows deeper. During patrols, I often found items that had gone missing from the station. A flashlight, a canteen, even one of the iron keys. Following Rule 28, I left them where they lay. On February 14th, Valentine's Day, I found a heart-shaped box of chocolates sitting on a stump near marker 7. The box was wrapped in red paper with a gold ribbon, looking like something from a high-end candy store. I knew I shouldn't touch it, but curiosity got the better of me. I opened the box carefully, expecting to find something sinister inside. Instead, I found 12 chocolates arranged in a perfect circle. Each one was decorated with a symbol. One was the tree with upward growing roots, another was the fence post with the number 48, a third was the 6-legged deer. The remaining 9 depicted other anomalies I had encountered over the past year and a half. I closed the box and left it on the stump, documenting its location and contents in my logbook. When I passed the same spot 3 hours later, the box was gone, but in its place was a single chocolate shaped like a key. The same kind of iron key I kept in the locked drawer. I didn't touch it. I simply noted its appearance in my logbook and continued my patrol. That night, the dripping in the corridor changed rhythm. 15 seconds between drops for an hour, then 10 seconds, then 20, as if whatever was causing it was experimenting with different patterns. Daniel called at 3 p.m. I found something, he said, his voice tight with excitement. Behind the station, buried under a pile of rocks, a metal box with journals inside. From previous rangers? I asked, making notes in my logbook. Yes, Daniel replied. Going back 50 years. They all say the same thing. Blackwood is changing, becoming more active, more direct. The older journals talk about simple anomalies, extra fence posts, strange animal tracks, unexplained noises. The newer ones describe personal encounters, tests, conversations with the entities. What do the most recent ones say? I asked. The last ranger before me, Marcus, he wrote that the preserve is trying to communicate something important, Daniel said. He wrote that the rules aren't just about survival anymore. They're about understanding. Understanding what? Ourselves, Daniel replied. Marcus wrote that Blackwood reflects whatever we bring to it. Our fears, our hopes, our memories. He wrote that the final test isn't about following or breaking the rules, but about recognizing ourselves in the reflections. After we ended the call, I sat by the radio for a long time thinking about what Daniel had said. Blackwood as a mirror. The anomalies as reflections of our inner selves. It explained so much. The personal nature of the tests, the way the entities seem to know our fears and desires, the increasing specificity of the challenges. That night I dreamed of walking through the forest and encountering versions of myself at different ages. Myself as a child, as a teenager, as a young adult. Each one carried a rule from the manual, but when I tried to read it, the words changed into memories I had long forgotten. When I woke at dawn, the logbook on the kitchen table was open to a blank page. On it, written in handwriting that wasn't mine, were 3 words. Which self are you? March brought the anniversary of my 2nd year at Blackwood. 24 months. According to the fragmented logs of previous rangers, no one had lasted more than 18 months. I had broken the record, but I wasn't sure whether that was an achievement or a warning. During my morning patrol on March 3rd, I found something new at the cabin at Marker 22. The door was standing open as it had been before, but this time there was a sign hanging from it that read, "The librarian is in." I stood frozen at exactly 50 yards, torn between duty and protocol. Rule 6 was absolute. Do not approach within 50 yards. But the sign suggested an invitation. An opportunity to understand what the cabin really was. Then I noticed something else. The sign wasn't hanging from a nail or hook. It was growing directly out of the wood, as if it were a natural part of the door. As I watched, the words changed, rearranging themselves into a new message. The library is open. I backed away slowly, then turned and walked back to the station, my heart pounding. When I arrived, I immediately radioed Daniel. "The cabin at Marker 22, I said without preamble. "The door is open again. There's a sign." "What does it say?" Daniel asked, his voice tight with tension. "It changes," I replied. "First it said the librarian is in. Then it said the library is open." Daniel was silent for a full minute. "The journals I found," he said finally. "The last entry from Marcus, he wrote that the library opens when the librarian is ready to see what's inside." "And what's inside?" I asked. "Everything," Daniel replied. "All the forgotten places, all the lost stories, all the alternate paths not taken. Marcus wrote that the library contains every version of Blackwood that has ever existed, or ever will exist." "And the librarian?" I asked. "Whoever is willing to read the books," Daniel said. "Whoever is willing to understand that the stories aren't just about the forest. They're about us." After we ended the call, I sat by the radio for a long time thinking about what Daniel had said. A library of every possible Blackwood. A collection of all the paths not taken. It was both terrifying and exhilarating. The possibility of understanding everything, the danger of losing oneself in the infinite. That night I dreamed of the cabin as a library, its interior larger than its exterior, shelves stretching upward into darkness. As I walked between them, books would occasionally fall to the floor, opening to reveal pages filled with my life, not as it had been, but as it could have been. In one book, I had never come to Blackwood, instead taking a job as a teacher in my hometown. In another, I had broken the rules early on and been consumed by the forest. In a third, I had become one of the entities testing new rangers as I had been tested. When I woke at dawn, the logbook on the kitchen table was open to a blank page. On it, written in handwriting that wasn't mine, were 3 words: "Which story will you choose?" April brought the spring thaw, the snow melting to reveal a forest bursting with new life. The trees budded, the birds returned, the animals emerged from hibernation. During patrols, I often found signs of the preserve's renewal. Circles of fresh grass where nothing should grow, flowers blooming out of season, streams flowing in directions that defied gravity. On April 15th, during my afternoon patrol, I found something new at Marker 11. A perfectly formed path of smooth gray stones that hadn't been there that morning. The path led into the dense, unmarked forest, disappearing between trees that seemed to part to receive it. I knew I shouldn't follow it. The manual was clear about staying on marked trails. But something about the path felt different, inviting rather than threatening, purposeful rather than random. I stood there for a long time, weighing the risks of following against the risks of ignoring. Finally, I took a step onto the path, then another. The stones beneath my feet felt warm despite the cool spring air. As I walked, the forest around me changed. The trees grew taller, their branches thicker, their leaves a deeper green than I had ever seen. The air grew still, the sounds of birds and animals fading into silence. After walking for what felt like 10 minutes, I came to a clearing. In the center stood a structure that looked like a lighthouse, though there were no bodies of water for miles around. It was constructed of the same gray stone as the path, with a single door at its base and a light at the top that pulsed like a slow heartbeat. I approached cautiously, noting the intricate carvings on the door, scenes from my time at Blackwood rendered in perfect detail. My first perimeter check, the encounter with the child in the red jacket, the blizzard, the cabin, the library. The final carving showed me standing where I was now, looking at the door. I reached out to touch the carving, and as my fingers made contact, the door swung open silently, revealing a spiral staircase that led upward into darkness. I stood there for a long time, torn between the desire to understand and the fear of what I might find. Finally, I stepped inside and began to climb. The stairs were made of the same warm stone as the path, their surface worn smooth by countless feet. As I ascended, I noticed carvings on the walls, depictions of previous rangers, each one caught in a moment of decision, some following the rules, some breaking them, some creating their own. At the top of the staircase, I found a circular room with windows that looked out not on the forest, but on other versions of it. A Blackwood in eternal winter, a Blackwood in perpetual summer, a Blackwood where the trees were made of metal and the rivers flowed with light. In the center of the room stood a pedestal with a single book bound in plain black leather. I approached cautiously, recognizing the book immediately. It was the manual I had found in the locked drawer on my first day at Blackwood. But as I drew closer, I saw that this version was different. The title on the cover read, "The Rules of Blackwood, a choose-your-own-ending story." I opened the book to the first page, which contained only a single sentence. Your survival depends on understanding these rules, not just following them. The second page began the numbered list, but these were different from the rules I had learned. 1. The fence posts are a test of perception. How many you see depends on how many you expect to see. 2. The dripping in the corridor is the sound of time passing. Sometimes it speeds up, sometimes it slows down, but it never stops. 3. The deer with 6 legs is a reminder that nature doesn't follow human rules. Neither does Blackwood. 4. The radio calls are not to confirm your position, but to confirm your presence. Something is always listening. 5. The hikers who offer food or water after 5 p.m. are testing your boundaries. What you accept defines what you become. 6. The cabinet marker 22 is a library of stories that haven't been written yet. Approach when you're ready to write your own. 7. The footsteps circling the station at night are the sound of possibilities not taken. Count them if you want to measure your regrets. 8. The hikers on the West Trail between 11 p.m. and 2 a.m. are versions of yourself from other timelines. Don't engage unless you're ready to confront your choices. 9. The iron keys are not for doors but for decisions. Each key represents a path not taken. 10. The circles of items on the forest floor are offerings. Accept them if you're ready to receive what they represent. I continued reading, fascinated by this new understanding of the rules I had followed for 2 years. Each one was a metaphor, a lesson, a key to understanding not just Blackwood but myself. When I reached the final page, I found a blank space with the words, "Write your own rule. This is the only one that matters." I stood there for a long time considering what rule I would write. Something about balance, something about understanding, something about the relationship between observer and observed. Finally, I picked up the pen that lay beside the book and wrote, "The rules are a conversation between Blackwood and whoever is here. Listen as much as you speak." As I finished writing, the words glowed with a soft blue light, then sank into the page, becoming part of the book. The light at the top of the lighthouse began to pulse faster, changing from red to blue to green to yellow, cycling through the colors of the rainbow. When I left the lighthouse and returned to the path, the forest looked the same as it had before, but somehow different. More alive, more present, more aware of my presence. The stones beneath my feet still felt warm, but now I understood they were not just stones, but a connection between me and the preserve. When I reached the main trail, the path of stones disappeared, as if it had never been there. I documented the experience in my logbook, noting the location and details of the lighthouse. When I checked the next day, there was no sign that a path had ever existed, no disturbance in the undergrowth, no evidence of my passage. That night, the dripping in the corridor stopped for good. The silence was complete, absolute, somehow more meaningful than the sound had been. At 2 a.m., as I went to cover the bathroom mirror, I caught a glimpse of movement in my peripheral vision. When I turned, there was nothing there. But in the mirror before I covered it, I saw not my reflection but the lighthouse, its light cycling through colors. I covered the mirror quickly, my heart racing but steady. The boundaries between inside and outside, between what was real and what was reflected, were becoming more porous, but that no longer frightened me. It was just part of the conversation. Daniel called at noon, his voice strained. "Something's happening at my station, the forest. It's rearranging itself." "Rearranging how?" I asked, making notes in my logbook. "The trails are changing," Daniel said. "The markers are moving. I followed the east trail this morning and ended up back where I started, even though I walked for 2 hours." "Have you consulted the manual?" I asked. "It's no help," Daniel replied. "The rules keep changing as I read them. 1 minute they say one thing, the next they say something else." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. "What do you mean by changing?" "The words rearrange themselves," Daniel insisted, "like they're alive, like they're trying to tell me something different from what they were written to say." "Maybe they are," I said gently. "Maybe the rules aren't static. Maybe they evolve as we evolve." "That's not in any rule," Daniel protested. "Make your own," I said. "Carefully." There was silence on the other end for a full minute. Then Daniel's voice came back, shaky but determined. "I'm going to try something. I'll call you back." I waited by the radio. My attention divided between the silent corridor and the window where I could see the trees swaying in a wind that wasn't blowing outside. 47 minutes passed before Daniel called back. "They're back to normal," he said, his voice breathless. "The trails, the markers, everything." I just said, "I understand that the rules change as I change. The forest just rearranged itself back to how it was." "Good," I said, though I wasn't sure it was good. "What else have you been experiencing?" "Nothing like this," Daniel admitted. "Just the usual stuff, the extra fence posts, the dripping, the voices. Nothing this direct." "The preserve is testing you," I said. "It wants to know how you'll respond when the rules don't work." "Honestly," I said, "not with fear or defiance, but with understanding. You're not here to conquer Blackwood, you're here to coexist with it." After we ended the call, I sat by the radio for a long time thinking about what I had told Daniel. Was it true? Or was I just rationalizing my own approach to the impossible? May brought the anniversary of my arrival at Blackwood. 2 years. I had survived longer than any previous ranger, according to the fragmented logs I had found. I had followed the rules, broken the rules, created my own rules. I had been tested, challenged, transformed. And I had begun to understand that Blackwood was not just a place but a relationship, a conversation between observer and observed, between self and other, between what is and what could be. During my morning patrol on May 15th, I found something new at Marker 7. A circle of 12 stones, each one carved with a different rule from the manual. In the center of the circle stood a single stone, uncarved, waiting for a rule of its own. I stood there for a long time, considering what rule to carve. Something about balance, something about understanding, something about the relationship between observer and observed. Finally, I took out my knife and carved, "The rules are a conversation. Listen as much as you speak." As I finished carving, the words glowed with a soft blue light, then faded into the stone. The other stones in the circle began to glow as well, each one pulsing with light in time with the others. After a minute, the light faded and the stones were just stones again. I documented the experience in my logbook, noting the location and details of the circle. When I checked the next day, the circle was gone, but in its place was a single stone carved with my rule, standing alone in the forest. That night, the radio call at 10 p.m. brought a new voice, one I recognized immediately, my own. "Station 17 requesting position check, over." I hesitated, then pressed the transmit button. "Position confirmed, all clear, over." The response came immediately, my voice distorted but clear. "The conversation continues, over." I didn't respond. I simply sat in the main room, iron keys spread on the table before me, and listened to the silence that followed. The dripping in the corridor had stopped for good. The mirror remained covered between 200 a.m. and 400 a.m. The fence posts remained at 47, though I occasionally saw the extra one from the corner of my eye. The rules were still there, still important, still necessary for survival. But they were no longer just guidelines or restrictions. They were part of an ongoing conversation between me and Blackwood, a dialogue that would continue as long as I was willing to listen. And I was willing. I had learned that the rules were not just about survival, but about understanding. Understanding the preserve, understanding myself, understanding the delicate balance between what we see and what is, between what we know and what we can only imagine. The next morning, I found a new rule slipped under the door, written on the same paper as the original rules, but in handwriting I didn't recognize. 36. The final rule is that there are no final rules. The conversation continues as long as you're willing to listen. I smiled and added the rule to my manual, then placed it back in the locked drawer. Outside, the sun was rising, casting long shadows across the preserve. Soon it would be time to perform my perimeter check, to count the fence posts, to continue the conversation. But not yet. For now, there was just the quiet of the station, the peace of understanding, the freedom of knowing that some rules were meant to be followed, some were meant to be broken, and some were meant to be rewritten entirely. The rules of Blackwood were not just about survival anymore. They were about connection. Connection to the forest, to its mysteries, to the part of myself that I had only begun to discover. And as I sat there in the quiet of the morning, I understood that the greatest rule of all was simply to remain open to the conversation, whatever form it might take.